Kal Kadosh, Erev Tov. We are starting the new program of Kinyan Masechta. We are starting Masechet Taanit. Just to give you an overview of Masechet Taanit, you should know that something very interesting is that there's going to be the 4 different chapters in Taanit. The first chapter is talking about tefillah for rain, and also the ta'aniyot on the stopping of rain, meaning that when there was no rain, they used to do ta'aniyot for this. This is in the first and second chapter. Yeah, the second chapter that's the first and second one. The third chapter is going to be speaking about tefillot and ta'anit on tzarot acherot and other types of suffering. That's going to be the third chapter. And the fourth chapter is going to be, when we're going to speaking about whether it's the arba ta'aniyot, the 4 fixed fasts that we always have, right? That obviously that we have, whether it's going to be, the or whatever. We're talking about the Shiva Sabet Tammuz, Tisha B'Av, Asara B'Tevet, and so on and so on. Okay, that's just at the beginning. When we're going to start our Mishnah, we have to remember that many times the Mishnayot were done in a fashion where we already know an answer even before explaining something. And that's why many times throughout Shas, the Gemara is going to ask, right, as this Gemara is going to ask, Tana Hecha Kai Diktani Mematai, which means, where are we exactly? Then all of a sudden the Gemara, the Mishnah is just shooting out. By the way, when do we mention Mashiv Ruach Umori the Geshem, or when do we mention Barech Alenu? Which in itself, we say to ourselves, well, how do you know you have to mention it or not? But it's like obvious. You understand? So therefore, since it's obvious, therefore that's how we're going to start the Mishnah. So the Mishnah starts as follows. Now, another interesting thing is I'm going to first give you an overview of the Mishnah, and then what we're going to do is we're going to see it inside. So the overview of the Mishnah is that the first half of the Mishnah is when do we mention Givurot Geshamim. Remember, Givurot Geshamim is Mashiv Ruach Umori Geshem. Why is that Givurot? It's Gura, it's strength, the power of the Almighty. When it comes and you hear the thunder and you see the rain and everything, that's the strength of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That is called Givurot Geshamim. In which bracha is Givurot Geshamim found? In the bracha of Mechaya Metim. What is Mechaya Metim? Also Gvura. It's also strength because it's parallel to Yitzchak Avinu. Now what happens is that at the beginning, we are going to mention, when do we start mentioning Givurot Geshamim? So there's a machloket between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yehoshua. Rabbi Eliezer comes and he says Yom Tov Rishon of Chag. Remember that whenever it mentions Chag, it always means Sukkot. Chag Stam, meaning without any other type of a narrative or any other type of a name, it's always Sukkot. So Yom Tov Rishon of Chag. Rabbi Yehoshua argues, and he says it's not Yom Tov Rishon Shel Chag, it's Yom Tov Acharon Shel Chag. It's the last Yom Tov of Chag. So this is a machloke between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yehoshua. Have that very clear. Okay, again, Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yehoshua, is it the first day of Sukkot, Yom Tov Rishon Shel Chag, or the last day of Sukkot, Shemini Atzeret, the last day of Chag? Now you have questions going back and forth, even though the Mishnah does not finish all the dialogue. Meaning the Mishnah is going to go through a question, answer, question, but it does not go through the full dialogue, because the rest of the dialogue is going to be in the Gemara. So the Gemara, the Mishnah asks, and this is Rabbi Yehoshua asking against Rabbi Eliezer. And he says, 1 second, why in the world would you mention Givurot Geshamim on Yom Tov Rishon Shel Chag? Yom Tov Rishon Shel Chag is what? Right? Yom Tov Rishon Shel here. What was Shitat Rabbi Eliezer? You mentioned Givurot Geshamim on the first day of Yom Tov. Now the Gemara is going to ask, right? This is what Rabbi Yehoshua is asking against Rabbi Eliezer. Why in the world would you mention Givurot Geshamim if what? If what? If it's Sukkot and it's a klala. If it's going to start raining, right? Everyone knows, remember Sukkah, that if it's going to start raining on Sukkot, it's a klala. So the fact if it's going to be a klala, a curse, if it's going to start raining, why in the world would you even mention it? So therefore, what are you doing? So answers Rabbi Eliezer to Rabbi Yehoshua, I never told you to ask for rain. We only mentioned to mention rain. Now here we will have to understand when we're doing it inside, I will explain to you a little bit better that basically what's going on about the maskirin, the asking, the mentioning. There's obviously something here in the words, and we're going to have to understand. Now, after that, Rabbi Yeshua comes and asks again a second question. So one more time, we had in the Mishnah in the breakdown, we had, when do we mention Givurot Geshamim? So you have a machloket, Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua. Rabbi Eliezer says, Yom Tov Rishon Shel Chag. Rabbi Yeshua says, Yom Tov Acharon Shel Chag. After that, they're going to go back and forth. So Rabbi Yeshua only comes and he asks against Rabbi Eliezer, why in the world are you going to mention it? It doesn't make sense. So Siman Klala in the Chag, why are you going to mention it on Sukkot? He says, Adoni, I never told you to ask for rain. I just said that you're going to mention the rain, and then that's it. So he asks back, if you're going to tell me that you're going to mention the rain, so then 1 second, mention all year. All year round mention it. It's always Gvura, right? Whenever we're talking about rain, it's always strength. It's always Gvura. So therefore, if it's going to be Gvura, so that's it. So he comes, and there's no answer here. There we will see what's going to happen already in the Gemara, what the answer of Rabbi Eliezer will be, even though you should know that the halacha is going to be like Rabbi Yoshua. The halacha is going to be like Rabbi Yoshua because we actually mentioned Givurot Keshamim only when? Only on Yom Tov Rishon Shel Chag. Yom Tov Acharon Shel Chag. Very good. See, I was testing you. You guys are on the ball. Very good. Next, all of a sudden, we are going to come in the Mishnah and mention now Sho'alim. Right? Remember that before we were talking about Mazkirim. Now we're talking about Sho'alim. And here all of a sudden we come and we say in the middle of the Mishnah, and Sho'alim et Geshamim ela samuch legeshamim. We are not talking about anymore Givurot Geshamim, because Givurot Geshamim is Mazkirim. What are we talking about? We're talking about She'elah. What is She'elah? They're asking for something. He said, She'elah. What is She'elah? She'elah is that you're asking for something. Barech Aleinu, you're asking. That's She'elah. So all of the requests that you're asking for the rain. So here it says, En sho'alin et geshamim, ela samuch lageshamim. Now all of a sudden we come back to what we mentioned. This is Stam in the Mishnah. Without any, right, Tanakama, no author, just Stam. All of a sudden we come back and now we're going to bring down another halacha to do with Givurot Geshamim. So if you paid attention, you have Haskarat Geshamim, right, which is Givurot Geshamim in the beginning of the Mishnah. Then you had a pause and we spoke about She'elah in Birkat HaShanim. And then we have Rabbi Yehuda that's going to go again back to Givurot Geshamim. Now something very interesting. Pay attention. Do we realize that this Mishnah in the middle all of a sudden spoke about She'elah? When do you ask for rain? Where do you ask for rain in Berachot? In the Berachot, when do you ask for rain? In the 9th Beracha. In the 9th Beracha, we ask V'ten Tarmatali Beracha. The entire beginning part of the Mishnah was talking about what? Mashiv Roch Morid Geshem, which is in Atagibor, the beginning of the Amidah. Right? That's when Givurot Geshamim is. All of a sudden, we have in the middle of the Mishnah a phrase which is all of a sudden about She'elah. This actually, I looked it up, and in the Mishnayot, it's a new Mishnah. Meaning in the Gemara, it's all one Mishnah. But if you look in the Mishnayot, it's a separate Mishnah. Because technically speaking, it doesn't flow. You're talking about Givurot Geshamim. We have the Machloket, Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yeshua. You continue going with the questions back and forth. All of a sudden, in the middle of the Mishnah, you have En Sho'alin et Geshamim ela samuch lageshamim, right? Which means now we're talking about asking for rain. We're not talking about mentioning for the rain. We're talking about asking for rain. And all of a sudden, then we come back to Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda now goes back to the mentioning of the rain. And what does he say? Rabbi Yehuda comes and he says, when do you mention it in the actual tefillah? Is it going to be the musaf? Is it going to be the shachrit? Is it going to be, so where exactly? Meaning, when are we actually going to mention it? We already said, where are you mentioning it? On the day. But which part of the day? So shachrit, musaf, and that's why he comes and he says, okay, so until here, this is going to be the outline of the Mishnah, what we call in Hebrew, shakla v'tarya. Shakla v'tarya means it's giving and taking, because we want to get very clear, right, the order of the Gemara, going from the beginning, right, until the end, okay? We also just want to understand that we're going to be learning this Masechet. Bezrat Hashem, we're learning it for the Refuah Shlema of our dear friend Rabbi Yitzhak Bar Esther. שיהיה לו רפואה שלמה, רפואת הנפש ובגוף, מה ורב שגידיו. נפלו ויגזור עליו גזרות טובות, ואתם עליו כל שלו ויעריך עמה בטוב שנותו מילים וכן ינצור לומר, Amen. So we're going to now start the beginning of the Masechet. Pay attention, word for word, when we're reading. So please put your fingers on the place, okay, and it starts. Me'ematai mazkirim gevurot geshamim. From when? Remember, matai, even nowadays, right? Matai is when. Me'ematai is from when. So from when mazkirin. Why does it mention the word mazkirin? Because the word mazkirin is that it has to be mentioned before we mention it. What does that mean? We are not allowed to mention Mashiva Ruach Murida Geshem until when? Until the Shliach Tzibur mentions it. Meaning the Shliach Tzibur, he comes, and that's when we go, Mashiva Ruach Murida Geshem, or Murida Tal Libracha, whichever one it is, the Libracha. So that's once the Shliach Tzibur comes, and he calls it out upon everybody, that's Mazkirin, they mention it, then we are the ones given permission to come in our Amidah, and we start it as well. So the Mishnah starts, Me'ematai Mazkirin. From when do we mention, right? Zocher, to remember, when do we mention? When do we mention Givurot Geshamim, the strengths of Geshamim? Remember that we're mentioning the strengths of Geshamim is Mashiva Ruach Molida Geshem. Technically, the Molida Geshem is the main part, but we have the minhag of also mentioning Mashiva Ruach as well. But the main part is the Molida Geshem is the Geshem part, the rain part. So Me'ematai Mazkirin Givurot Geshamim. Rabbi Eliezer Omer Miyom Tov Rishon Shel Chag, okay, and Rabbi Yoshua Omer Miyom Tov Acharon Shel Chag. A general rule in learning Gemara or Mishnayot. How do you know if somebody is arguing or adding on? How do you know if somebody's arguing or adding on? If they are adding on, usually it would say Amar Ribi, whatever his name is. If they are arguing, it says Ribi, whatever his name is, Omer. So therefore here it says Rabbi Eliezer Omer. Rabbi Eliezer says Miyom Tov Rishon Shel Chag, from the first Yom Tov of Chag. Remember, Chag is Sukkot. And Rabbi Yoshua Omer, Rabbi Yoshua argues. That's why he says Rabbi Yoshua Omer. It doesn't just say Amar Rabbi Yoshua. It says Rabbi Yoshua Omer. Rabbi Yoshua says, Miyom Tov Acharon Shel Chag, from the Yom Tov Acharon of Chag. Okay, very good. So you have a machloket, Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yoshua. Is it the first day of Sukkot or the last day of Sukkot? First day of Sukkot is Yom Tov Rishon Shel Chag. Last day of Sukkot is Shemini Atzeret of Chag. Now again, so the Mishnah started. When do we mention Gevurot Geshamim? Machloket. After the machloket, what do we say? We're going to have part of the dialogue between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yoshua. The truth is here, it's a one-sided dialogue. It's Rabbi Yoshua only attacking Rabbi Eliezer, and Rabbi Eliezer has to answer. And it doesn't even give it his final answer, because the final answer is going to be in the Gemara. It's not going to be in the Mishnah. But now let's see what happens. So comes Amar Lo Rabbi Yoshua, says Rabbi Yoshua, Amar Lo, says to him, to Rabbi Yoshua. So he's coming and he's telling to Rabbi Yoshua, right? So says Rabbi Yoshua to Rabbi Eliezer, Hoil, since Ve'en hageshamim ela siman kelala bechad. Since that the geshamim is not only, many times in Hebrew, we use what's called a double negative. What is a double negative? En, ela. En means it's not. Ela is rather, which is also like a not. So it's saying, hoil ve'en hageshamim ela. Since the geshamim is not other than a siman kelala during the Chag, which means if it rains on Sukkot, is that a bracha or is that a klala? So we know that if it's going to rain on Sukkot, it's a klala. So the fact that it's going to be a klala, as lama maskir, so why are you going to mention it? It doesn't make sense. Why in the world would you come and you mention it? Now why? Because actually here it's something very interesting, because Rashi actually explains, right? We're not doing Rashi's inside, remember that was the general rule, but the Rashi actually explains that the fact that you're mentioning it, it appears as if you're praying for it. Because the second that you mention it, it looks like you're praying for it. You're right, you didn't ask anything. Mashiva Ruach Murida Geshem, you didn't ask for rain. You just mentioned that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the Almighty, and He is the one that brings rain. You didn't ask for anything. She'elah is bakashat tzracha. We're asking the parnasah in the 9th beracha, which is the beracha of parnasah. That's when we ask for rain. But you didn't do that. But he says, Amallo, he comes and he says, Amallo Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer comes and he answers of Yeshua. Afani lo amarti lishol laskir. I never told you to ask for rain. I only told you to mention the rain. Right? Again, laskir, to mention it. I'm not asking. I'm not telling you to ask. I'm telling you just to mention it. So he comes and he says, right? El laskir mashiv ruach umorid geshem beonato in its proper time. Now, during the time of Sukkot, that's already the proper time of rain. Right? We know that many times in Sukkot, even here in Miami, what happens? It rains, but that's when it starts the proper time of Sukkot. We can't really bring a proof from Miami because Miami also rains during the summer and not the winter. Right? But it's there. Amarlo, so he comes and he tells him, Rabbi Yoshua answers to Rabbi Eliezer. In Cain, if so, leolam yehem maskir. Right? You should always mention it. Okay? What does that mean? If you're already going to tell me that you're not asking for rain and you're only mentioning a praise of the Almighty, so all year round mention it. Even in the summer, when it doesn't rain, mention it. And that's what Rabbi Yoshua argues against Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer is going to answer this in the Gemara. And Rabbi Eliezer is going to answer that there's no chovah to mention it. He's saying you're not obligated to mention it. Right? But, if you could, if you want, basically. But this is what Rabbi Yoshua comes and he argues. The next part of the Mishnah, again, as I told you, this all of a sudden has nothing to do with the previous part of the Mishnah that we mentioned. What does he say? He comes and he says, right, as follows. He comes and he says, En shoalim et geshamim, ela samuch legeshamim. You're not going to ask for rain unless it is close to the time of the asking the rain. So here, if you actually look on the explanations on the Mishnayot, they explain what happened. They explain whether it's according to Rabbi Eliezer or according to Rabbi Yoshua, according to everybody, and that's why I guess it's brought down here, everybody agrees that in such a case, in the case that we're mentioning over here, everybody agrees, right, that it says, En shoalim et geshamim ela samuch geshamim. That means like this. Here, the entire machloket was, when do you mention tazkara, which is but to do with the 10 Matali Bracha, which is the asking for the rain, according to all opinions, it is only close to the time of the actual rain season. And that's why, for example, here in the diaspora, it's 60 days afterwards, which we're going to learn later on, or whether it's going to be on the 7th or whatever it is in Mar Cheshvan, but there's going to be a machloka later on. So that's according to all opinions. Okay, according to everybody. But this part, technically, as I already told you, was a new Mishnah. If you look at the Mishnah, there's already Mishnah Bet. It's not Mishnah Aleph. In the Gemara, it's all one Mishnah. So this is all one Mishnah. But in the Gemara, in the Mishnayot, it's already Mishnah Bet because this is already like a new topic. Had nothing to do with what we mentioned before. Okay? 1 second. So now he comes and he says as follows. Okay? We go back now, and now we mentioned the Yehuda Omer. The Yehuda now comes, and he's going to add on, right? And he's going to say as follows. Ha'over lifnei teva. If somebody is going to be over lifnei teva, remember, over lifnei teva means he's a shliach tzibur. We go in front of the teva. We do it in the teva over here, and Ashkenazim, they have a teva in the front, right? I don't know if you ever saw the shtender. It's over there on the right side of the Hechal, always usually, and they have it over there. They have like a teva, which that's where they come, right? And they do their shliach tzibur. We do the teva over here. This they call a bima, right? And we call it the teva. So ha'over lifnei teva means somebody that's being shliach tzibur. So ha'over lifnei teva, somebody that's going to become shliach tzibur, biyom tov acharon shel chag, on yom tov acharon shel chag, right? So what's going to happen? Ha'acharon maskir, harishon maskir. Remember, right? What did we just mention now? We just mentioned, right, that the one that's being shliach tzibur, and he's yom acharon shel chag. Who does that go like? When you say yom acharon shel chag, that we're going to start saying Mashiach Baruch Geshem. So it's going like Rabbi Yoshua, right? It's going to Rabbi Yoshua, right? We don't pass like Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer says Yom Tov Rishon Shel Chag, right? This is Yom Tov Acharon Shel Chag is Rabbi Yoshua. So it's Rabbi Yoshua. So he comes and he says on Yom Tov Acharon Shel Chag, right? He says Acharon Maskir, Harishon Eno Maskir. What's Acharon and what's Rishon? Acharon is Musaf. How many times do you pray? Right, a day. So obviously we're doing Shachrit and Musaf. So during the day, right? So again, we're talking about on Shemini Atzeret. And on Shemini Atzeret, what's going to happen? The Acharon, which is Musaf, is going to mention Mashiv Roch Morida Geshem. And Harishon, which is the first one, Eno Maskir is not going to mention it. Okay? Then it says, which means that the first one is still going to say Morida Tal from the summer. Next, Biyom Tov Harishon Shel Pesach, on Yom Tov Harishon of Pesach, Harishon Maskir, the first one is going to mention it, right? The Acharon Eno Maskir. The last one is not going to mention it. Okay? Right? So what's happening now, like this, one more time. When are the switches? So the truth is, until now, we didn't mention the switch of Morida Tal yet. We were only mentioning Mashiv Baruch Morida Geshem. And that was the beginning of the Mishnah, the machlok between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yoshua. Right? Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yoshua. So what happens? Now what happens is as follows. You have a machlok with Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yoshua. That's only going to be, right, at the beginning of, by Sukkot time. When do you switch back? So you switch back on the first day of Pesach. Right? Yeah. So what happens on the first day of Pesach? So on the first day of Pesach, when you switch back, and that's what we're going to see. When do you switch back? So he says, Rabbi Yehuda comes and he says like this: on Shemini Atzeret, Shachrit. What do you say? Morida Tal. When do you switch to Mashiach Roch Geshem? Musaf. On Yom Tov Rishon Shel Pesach. Exact opposite. That Rishon Shachrit. What are you going to mention? Mashiach Roch Geshem. What are you going to mention on Musaf? Morida Tal. Exactly. You switch to Musaf. Exactly. Okay?